Welcome to the Water Advisory Committee meeting of Orange County, the WACO. This is the place where we discuss water issues in Orange County. Elected officials from cities, from the water districts, and a selected group of technologists who knows everything about water. Today we have a very interesting meeting, but before we do continue, I'd like to invite Director Fred Ajarian to lead us on the Pledge of Allegiance.
Everybody, if you would please pledge allegiance to our great flag. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Fred, and I'm very glad nobody kneeled. Okay, to get started, let's invite Kathy Green to give us the Aqua report. Kathy?
Good morning, everyone. I've been talking about three bills that Aqua, and I'm sure most of the people in this room, have been very worried about. And all of those three bills, first the Monning bill, which was the tax or fee on water. It's now a 2-year bill. And the Hertzberg and Friedman bills are also 2-year bills. So that means we take up the fight starting next January. Aqua has stayed in the fight, and all of your agencies have been such a great help. Thank you for your letters, for your support, for talking to people, and hopefully we can make a lot of modifications or just get rid of them and change them completely. Then we've also been working on the water storage investment program. We're briefing key audiences on a technical study that examines how California's water supply would operate more flexibly and effectively with the addition and integrated operation of a new storage capacity. The first of its kind study, and it was conducted by MBK engineers. It lays out a new approach to water storage integration in California. And as the California Water Commission conducts its public process to allocate $2.7 billion from Prop 1 money to help fund these storage projects. On September 20th, Aqua presented its key findings of the study to the California Water Commission to assist in the development of the Commission's water storage investment program. Proponents of the new water storage projects in California had until August 14th to submit applications to the CWC for Prop 1 funding. I hope anybody who was doing that made that deadline, and they're expected to make their final decisions in May or June of next year. Groundwater replenishment at its July 28th meeting, the Aqua directors approved groundwater replenishment initiative as a fourth policy priority goal for 2017. The board also approved the Groundwater Replenishment Initiative Task Force, co-chaired by our Vice President Brent Hasty and Eric Averett, General Manager of the Rosedale Rio Bravo Water Storage District. The task force is charged with identifying strategies, including projects, programs, or recommendations to increase groundwater replenishment. So we now have a draft work plan. and then connecting with our new generation. We've also, Aqua's now developed a scholarship opportunity for new water industry professionals to attend conferences. So if we have kids or people who have a hard time paying for those conferences, you can apply to Aqua for those scholarships. And also, we just took action on the Ted and Nancy Way Scholarship for the next generation of water leaders. The scholarship is funded by them, and it'll be two $5,000 scholarships for deserving undergraduates in water-related fields. So tell them to start applying for those scholarships. And then finally, two upcoming events. Aqua's 2017 Regulatory Summit will be in Sacramento on October 17th. And then our fall conference will be down here in Anaheim at the Marriott Hotel from November 28th to December 1st, and hope to see you all there. Any questions? Thanks.
Thank you. Before I call the next speaker, I'd like to remind some requests by our security officer in Orange County Water District. We actually had 2 weeks ago tragedy in Las Vegas. Every time there is a tragedy like this, the security in the companies, in the agencies is reviewed to make sure nothing happens. So to apply lessons learned. Although we haven't learned so much yet, the person in charge of the security of the Orange County Water District, who actually has to respond for one of the most known wastewater treatment plants, recycling plants in the world. They reviewed their plans, and they wanted to ask us, people who participate, who come to this meeting, one favor. Spend 1 extra minute of your time here by signing in the front desk. And then when you sign here, also, it's a good idea, the list that you sign here goes to Heather, who is the person in charge of knowing who's coming to WACO. But the list that is in front is the one that the emergency and security personnel will have in their hands if something happens within the building. So we need to know who's here and who is still here. So if something happens, we want to make sure we account for everybody. So please make sure that when you come, sign in that piece of paper and then sign here too. That will work for everybody. We never know. We have the best of the minds here in the water in Orange County, and some crazy guy may come and I'm going to finish that, and we cannot allow that to happen. Okay, now that I feel better, let's invite the next speaker to give us the report on the status of the Met. Director Linda Ackerman. Jim, do you have a question before?
Yeah, I would just like to make an introduction of a first-time visitor here. I noticed that we jumped over that part of the, but I'd like to introduce Maris Di Pasquale, the newest member of the board at Mesa Water District.
Thank you, Jim. And now that you brought it up, I apologize for skipping that line. Anybody else is visiting for the first time? Good. Thank you very much. And now, Linda, this is yours.
Good morning. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about, we've actually had 2 board meetings since I was here. We've spent an inordinate amount of time at both sessions, committee meetings and board meetings, talking about, you guessed it, the Cal Water fix. We decided before the September meeting to not vote on it because there were a lot of directors who felt that they just weren't ready, that their agencies just weren't ready to vote. So we postponed the vote to this week's board meeting. In the meantime, we decided at our executive meeting on September 26th to have a Cal Water Fix workshop, so the entire day was dedicated to that. The workshop began with 3 hours of public comment. If you've ever been to a very long city council meeting, then you know the kind of public comment we have sometimes. The comments, fortunately, ran, I would say, in my estimation, 3 to 1, were positive. We actually had the business community come out from Orange County, Los Angeles County, the City of Los Angeles, Inland Empire, San Bernardino, all those areas. Many of our agencies, their general managers, and other water agencies and groups came and spoke, along with chambers of commerce, etc., in favor of the fix. There was a lot of public comment, primarily from environmentalists, against the fix. As you know, this week we voted, and the board passed the water fix with a vote of 68.97%. As you might remember, at MET, it's a weighted vote, and that was the weighted vote in favor. 3 Los Angeles directors voted no on the project, along with 2 San Diego directors, and their other 2 abstained. Santa Monica voted no, and the San Fernando director was absent, so that was the total of 68.97, which was really an overwhelming vote of support. At this meeting, LA primarily started and tried to discuss the possibility of building a smaller project. San Diego kind of chimed in with that, but it really didn't carry any weight with any of the other directors, so the motion passed as it stood with the board letter, which was the 2 tunnels. On another note, on the other water source, the Colorado River, the Minute 323, which I've talked about here several times, which is a binational agreement on the river between the 7 states and Mexico, was signed. This will allow all to join in conservation efforts, sharing in shortages, including Mexico will share in the shortages, and it allows for everyone to store water in the ICS program in Lake Mead. An interesting note in this agreement will allow IID, the Imperial Irrigation District, to participate in the ICS program for the use of water for future deliveries to the Salton Sea. IID will also share in reductions of shortages. With this pilot program of storage, we expect to reserve 108,000 acre-feet of water in the lower basin, and the upper basin will preserve, they were also included in their own agreement, they will preserve 17,000 acre-feet. On a positive note for now, Lake Powell is up 50 feet and Lake Mead is up 6 feet. Brian Goshi at the Water Stewardship meeting gave a presentation last month, September, about climate change impacts and adaptation. He indicated Southern California can expect warming on average of 4 to 5 degrees. I think you've all heard that, with the south becoming drier and the north becoming wetter. Snowpack in California, I was going to say something about the weather in Northern California, but I won't because they're having fires. But the weather certainly up and down the state has changed. Snowpack in California provides 15 million acre-feet of natural storage with snow. The Sacramento Valley and the San Joaquin River area delivers about 14.5 million acre-feet. This means, obviously, that we could possibly have less snowpack in the north and earlier runoff. The advance of salinity in the delta from the ocean and the need to provide additional water storage for that reason, for that influx of salty water, it's important for us to maintain the quality of water and also to provide water at temperatures adaptable to the fish. Therefore, of course, we need the storage to do that. So it's a good reason, an argument for more storage. The Colorado River Basin faces similar issues. There they experience increased evaporation and evapotranspiration and decreasing runoff for the last 9 out of the last 10 years. The emphasis for us at MET is adapting to these issues and shifting to the outdoors, where we as an agency will look for smart investments in local and regional supply projects. This will require robust, for us, decision-making and modeling in our IRP. We will be evaluating multiple future climate scenarios and incorporating additional uncertainties and vulnerabilities into the IRP. Our September meeting also focused on the evaluation of our 4 direct reports. We do that every year: the general manager, the auditor, the general counsel, and the ethics officer. The board received a letter of resignation on the morning of those meetings from our ethics officer, Dina Gailey, and it was accepted. The subcommittee that was appointed by Chairman Meckert to look at the overall operations and functioning of our ethics office will continue to work with the outside attorney we also hired to look at the way the ethics office functions. They will come back to the board with their report soon. The chairman will then also appoint a committee at some point to do a search for a new ethics officer. In the meantime, our auditor, Jerry Riss, is overseeing the ethics office, so it still runs smoothly as an ethics office. And that is my report. And now for that little arbitrary, obscure water fact. Did you know that the first drug that was sold as a water-soluble tablet was aspirin? Somebody back there knew that. And that was in the year 1900. And that was my report.
Well, we have found that even for people who have spent the time working in the water business, some terms make or not make sense. For example, it took me a few years to learn what intentionally created surplus is. I mean, if we're in a drought, how do you create those things? Then somebody talked to me about Article 21 water. Where do you buy that one? So there are terms that we use within our everyday life, and the same thing happens when we hear Colorado River State Water Project. We know there are 2 big items out there that help us bring water. And I thought that some people in the audience ask us some of those questions, and then we realized that not everybody has been really immersed in the water business for 30 years. So we invited somebody who's going to tell us about one of the biggest projects in California, the State Water Project, which is actually responsible for delivering us most of the water that we use in Southern California, together with the Colorado River. Ideally, we will learn a little bit of what exactly is the project. Is it a project or is it a really big structure, big infrastructure? When is a project, or when it's not? So we're going to learn the basics today of what the State Water Project is, how Metropolitan uses the State Water Project to import some of the water, what are the different scenarios that can happen with the water supply that come from the State Water Project. So we have invited the person who knows the most about that at the Metropolitan Water District, the engineer Kevin Donhoff. Kevin is the section manager of the water contracts that includes the State Water Project, the local projects, exchanges, every single thing that has to do with bringing water to Southern California through Metropolitan. Kevin is a registered professional engineer who started over 35 years ago in the business, started with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, then moved to the Metropolitan Water District about 28 years ago. And anything that we want to know about the State Water Project, we can ask Kevin. Kevin, will you please guide us?
Good morning. So there is certainly a lot to talk about, a lot of terms and a lot of issues, and I could probably stand here all day and talk, and I'm happy to spend as much time with you this morning as you feel appropriate. I'll go through a presentation, and then I'll be glad to answer questions. So Jose had it right. I'm the second most senior tenured person working on state water project issues at Metropolitan. Steve Arakawa would be the other. Just a few years ago, I felt like I was the junior person, and all of a sudden, all these people working for me were looking up to me, and I was supposed to have all the answers. So I'd like to start in the beginning, but I wasn't around then. But I will walk us through some of the history of the State Water Project, the facilities. Who are the state water contractors, Metropolitan being the largest, how we pay for and manage the costs, how we order our water and how it's managed. So December 1, the department's going to come out with the water allocation for 2018, and I'll explain what that means. And then I'll talk about some of the benefits and challenges. So in the beginning, water planning in California started just after the turn of the century. And this shows Robert Marshall. There was actually something called the Marshall Plan for water. It looked at things including putting dams across the Sacramento River right as it flowed into the San Francisco Bay, and various different other types of options to manage water in the state. In 1931, the first water plan was developed by a gentleman named Hyatt, and that's one of our, the namesake of one of our very important generation plants at Lake Oroville. The plan was to develop an incredibly complicated water resource system that would move water throughout the state. But at that period of time, the cities and the folks just really didn't have the money to implement that vision. So the federal government stepped in, and in 1933, with the CVP Act, they developed a project known as the Central Valley Project. And that was to capture water and move it throughout the Central Valley to primarily serve agricultural, but a lot of urban areas as well. The Feather River was contemplated in 1951. With the growth that was occurring after World War II, it became pretty obvious that the existing water resources weren't going to be able to be stretched to meet what the future demands for water might be. I've seen a report that projected that there would be 50 million people in California by the early 1990s. Thankfully, that didn't happen because the water systems are struggling to keep up right now. If we added 15 more million people to California, I don't know where the water would come from. So we have a little bit more time to develop our water resources, and I think we're actually on track to do that. So in 1957, California Water Plan was issued. This was the first one. It was done by Harvey Banks. So Harvey Banks Pumping Plant. He is the namesake for that. And that really gave impetus to the State Water Project. It was known as the Feather River Project at the time. And this shows a picture, I think, of Senior, the Governor Brown at the time, blasting a site that's one of the abutments for Oroville Dam. So in 1960, the Burns-Porter Act was narrowly passed. Really just by a fraction. And what the Burns-Porter Act was, it was a general obligation bond series that was going to be issued to finance the construction of the State Water Project. It was really a banking system. Ultimately, all the costs of the State Water Project is borne by the users, the water contractors. This general obligation bond was the financing mechanism that put the money up front to build the project, and then as time goes on, the contractors like Metropolitan repay the cost. So there's no subsidy like there was in the State Water Project, in the Central Valley Project, where the federal government provided a lot of grants and money to get that project going. This project is the costs are entirely borne by the water contractors. And in 1960, Metropolitan signed the first contract. It's known as the prototype contract. All other contracts for State Water Project water followed the same provisions that Metropolitan has in its contract. It didn't take long. 1962, the first deliveries were made to the Bay Area. And, a lot of folks will talk about, the State Water Project, it's to move all this water to Southern California, but Silicon Valley heavily depends on exported water supplies to their region, and the State Water Project is a big piece of that. Then in 1972, Metropolitan took its first deliveries. After paying for approximately 10 years, we finally received some water supplies. So I'll just stop. Any historical context questions? Any thoughts anybody has? Don, I'll stop periodically. Don, who's closer to in the beginning, has a question for me.
The first quarter was $1.75 billion in 1960. Let's say 60. If you escalate that dollar amount to the current, it's probably going to be 10 times that figure, which would be $17 billion. So that's what we're looking at for the Delta fix. Right. So cost-wise, there's a great similarity.
The project that was envisioned to be constructed under the Burns Port actually included facilities to move water across the Delta. They were never developed or constructed. It was also recognized that the $1.75 billion wasn't enough. There were projections that it was going to be well over $2 billion, closer to maybe $3 billion, but that's what they felt that they could politically move with a bond initiative, and they'd figure out financing of the later projects at a later date, and they have since done that. So, yeah, thanks for that, Don. So, just some facts. Oh, they did it by click. Yeah.
Yeah, just a quickie. At the very beginning, where was the water coming from?
Well, City of LA used groundwater, and
This is beyond City of LA. Higher. No.
correct. So the local agencies throughout the state developed their own water supplies. Metropolitan had its Colorado River Aqueduct constructed. We started in 1929, started delivering waters in the 1930s. Orange County was receiving Colorado River water during that period of time. But as areas were growing and building out, the supplies that they had, whether it be Hetch Hetchy for San Francisco and the Bay Area, the McCulmney Aqueduct for Oakland and in the East Bay, groundwater in the Central Valley. I'll talk a little bit about subsidence later on. They were overdrafting the San Joaquin Valley about 1 million acre feet a year, and that was contributing to this land subsidence that I'll mention before. So the water resources all throughout the state were stretched so thin, they were pulling water from future generations. Most of the water in the state falls in the north. Director Ackerman talked about the snowpack, and she talked about 15 million in the northern part of the state and 15 million in the central part of the state. That's 30 million acre feet of water. Lake Mead is 15 million acre feet of water on the Colorado River. So you had 30 million acre feet of water just flowing out. So the State Water Project was a concept to try to capture and re-regulate those supplies and make it available to the citizens of the state of California.
Somebody was talking about inflation, so there's a very interesting website called The Value of the Dollar. And we look at it in a way as a percentage of the gross domestic product. If you look at that inflation, it was approximately $58 billion, which gives you an idea of its percentage of the economy, which is more of a measure of what the people thought at the time. So that 1.75 billion is about 58 billion in today's terms of gross domestic product. So the importance to the economy is much greater than just the straight inflation.
And that sounds about right to me, because if it takes $17 billion to build the tunnels, which is probably about 1/10 of the State Water Project, if you scale up the rest of the project, you get up into the 50 billions. So it was a pretty massive, mammoth undertaking that the state took on. There's been hiccups and problems, but by and large, it's been a pretty successful project, and we've benefited greatly because of that. Yeah.
Kevin, do you think that in today's environment, the Central Valley Project could ever get built?
Nope.
You know, all the regulation, negativism, environmentalism, you know, the whole package out there is just a big impedance to this kind of project.
Jose mentioned the great wisdom that exists within this room. So I'll look to others with great wisdom to answer that question, whether or not the federal government would be able to build a project like that today. So.
Federal government, state, whoever, I don't think it would ever get built.
Yeah, it would be quite a challenge for sure. Let me quickly go through some of the numbers here. So 700 miles of canals, 20 pumping plants, 5 hydroelectric power plants, pump generation, 34 storage facilities. A few years ago, we took a look. I'll talk a little bit about activities to take over operations of the State Water Project through a JPA. We took a look, and we estimated the number of employees or people, a workforce that would be needed to operate the State Water Project. It was, a consultant report came up with somewhere between 900 and 1,200 people. The geographic range of the project is over 600 miles. It's quite a challenge to make sure that it operates. So that's quite a bit of people and a lot of facilities. Oop, that moved too quickly. So major facilities on the State Water Project. We're familiar with Lake Oroville. It had some problems earlier this year with its spillway. I was actually up there yesterday. They have a target date of November 1st for it to be operational. And there's a big gap in the spillway as of yesterday, but I feel pretty confident they're going to have it ready to go November 1st. They won't need to use it because right now the lake levels are really low, but they'll be prepared if we were to have another big wet winter. They'll be able to operate it. It holds over 3.5 million acre feet, which is pretty large, second largest in the state of California. It has a flood control purpose. There's some recreation on it, but by and large, it's one of the primary water supply features for the State Water Project. Then water is released from Oroville, flows through the Feather River, into the Sacramento River, through the Delta, and then it's exported at Banks Pumping Plant. This pumping plant can pump over 10,000 CFS, a huge amount of water. Ordinarily, it doesn't do that. It's not permitted to divert from the rivers that much. Having the tunnels will help improve the operations and the reliability of moving water through Banks Pumping Plant, but it's the major water export conveyance feature. And then as you go down the California Aqueduct, if you pass through the lovely town of Los Baños and you take a quick turn, you end up at San Luis Reservoir. And this is a picture looking east of the reservoir about half full It's a project that is a joint state water project, CVP, federal project. They collaborated in building this reservoir, over 2 million acre feet. 1 million of that is dedicated to the state water project. So every year we want to fill that up, fill our 1 million acre foot up share of that reservoir, and then drain it. That's how we would operate San Luis Reservoir. So you export water out of the delta, you fill, and you drain San Luis. And then water goes down the California aqueduct, through the San Joaquin Valley, series of pumping plants. There's a pretty significant one at the very southern edge of Kern County, known as Edmonston Pumping Plant. It's the world's highest lift. Over 1,900 feet, the water's lifted up to continue on to Southern California. There's 14 pumping units there. There's 2 wings. So they're able to take 1 or 2 out of service and do maintenance and continue pumping and operating and keep the water flowing. A lot of the system is designed with that kind of redundancy. Once it's over the Tehachapis and into Southern California, the water flows through Pyramid Lake and then through Castaic Power Plant. It's a major recovery facility for the state water project. So you use all that energy to pump it up 1,900 feet and more to get it to Southern California, and then we have an opportunity to recover some of that energy, and it's done at the Castaic Power Plant. This is a unique power plant on the system in that it's a partnership with LADWP. And so when it was being built, LADWP came in, they oversized it and developed it into a pump generation plant. So the water can be pumped from Elderberry Forebay, which is basically an arm of Castaic Lake. It can be pumped back up to Pyramid and then released down again. And so that pump generation activity is what LADWP does. But the State Water Project gets the benefit of the energy of moving water through. So it's a pretty important power savings feature for us. And
What's the overall efficiency of that process? Do you have any idea?
about 60%.
Pretty good.
Yeah. So if it's the opportunity to benefit from that plant is derived from a difference between on-peak and off-peak energy costs. So if you have higher on-peak energy costs during the day, you can be generating, and at night you can be pumping back up. That's starting to change a little bit. With the renewable resources that are being developed, we're seeing that differential between on-peak and off-peak doesn't always exist. So I'm a little hesitant to give you an actual number, but going back in time, there was a 60-70% differential in the pricing. So if it costs 30% more, you could benefit by operating this plant. On the East Branch, water flows down, and we have the ability to capture energy at Devil Canyon Power Plant, and this is out by the 215 freeway out near Rialto. And then the water flows down through the Santa Ana Valley Pipeline to the Terminus Reservoir at Lake Paris. This picture shows the lake level drawn down because the dam was deemed to be seismically deficient. What the picture doesn't show, looking at the picture on the right side of the dam, they've now constructed a large buttress to hold the dam in place if there were an earthquake and shaking. The movement and the shaking of the dam could cause it to slump, and therefore making it vulnerable to failure. So the buttress will hold it in place. They've put a cutoff wall to cut off the underflow, a number of features and actions to stabilize this reservoir. It should be back in service by the end of this year, if not early, the first few months of next year. So we're going to actually be able to put another 50,000 acre feet back into to Lake Paris, and then that'll be a helpful water storage feature for us. Okay, any questions on the features, the facilities operations? Yes?
What is the total power required to operate all these pumping stations?
So it's a little bit different whether you move it on the east branch or the west branch. But if I were to meld all of it together, it takes about 3,200 kilowatt hours for each acre foot to be moved into Southern California. That's after subtracting out the generation from the generation plants. So if you only looked at the energy to pump, you'd probably be up around 5,000 or 6,000 kilowatt hours for each acre foot. So you might say, wow, that's a lot, but when you take into consideration all that recovery that occurs, it's a pretty efficient project. You're moving a lot of water a long ways, and you're only using 3,200 kilowatt hours. I can be a little bit of a cheerleader for the State Water Project, so take some of these things with a grain of salt. So Metropolitan is the largest of the state water contracts. When we initially signed our contract, we assigned a contract for 1.5 million acre feet. But you may be familiar with a 2 million or a 1.9 million, actually 1.9 and 1,150,000 acre feet. So what happened? What's the difference with the numbers? Well, in 1964, the state of California lost in the Supreme Court to Arizona. And it became apparent that we weren't going to be able to forever rely on 1 million acre feet through the Colorado River aqueduct. Our basic apportionment was going to be cut down to 550. The State Water Project was having difficulty contracting and getting enough people to sign up. So we stepped up and we added another 500,000 acre feet to our contract that would have taken it to 2 million. And then there was a little city that was contracting that was having problems, and they decided to join Met instead of contracting with the state, and so we got there 11,500. So our basic amount was 2,011,500 acre feet from the State Water Project. And then in 2004, after the QSA deal was reached on the Colorado River aqueduct, we agreed to provide some of our Table A share to sell it to Coachella Valley Water District, with a provision that in dry years we could call some of that water back. The reason why we did that is because here was this massive project that was built, and every year we were paying the costs, but we were only moving about 60% of the water through it. So it was an opportunity for us to shed off some of our cost and still have a high level of reliability. So after that, our allotment, or our Table A amount from the State Water Project became 1.9,150,000 acre feet. So trivia, more trivia than you needed to know on Met's amounts. So there's 29 contractors. Originally there was 32, and some have been consumed by other State Water Project contractors. You can see in the north, they're primarily municipal contractors, agricultural contractors in the San Joaquin Valley. Kern County Water Agency actually holds a portion of urban or M&I entitlement, and that would make them roughly the third or fourth largest urban entitlement holder of State Water Project water, but they're mostly thought of as an agricultural contractor. And then a large number of contractors in the San Joaquin Valley. The last hookups were Central Coast, San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara County, and San Gorgonio Pass Water Agency, which is the second from the bottom. And I want to point those out to kind of give you a sense of cost effectiveness. We talked about building the project $1.75 billion in the 60s and it being worth 50 or 70 billion now. I'll go through some numbers. It'll show the average cost over the last 10 years, about $450 an acre foot of delivered water to Metropolitan. For those agencies that had their facilities constructed in the 80s and thereafter, they're probably well over $2,000 an acre foot. So those that signed on early and took deliveries early are fortunate to really be able to enjoy, cost-effective supplies from the State Water Project. Okay, so by Table A amounts, that's our contract amount, we have the right to 46% of the water that's allocated. Kern County is about a quarter, 24%, and then everybody else, all the other 27 contractors amount for 31%. So clearly two big ones. Yes, question?
Where's Sacramento in all this? Where are they?
They're trying to figure out how to put water meters on their.
I knew that.
So the answer is not a part of this, and I'd be happy to talk. It really has to do with the water rights system in California. First in time, first and right. They've been there for a long time. Yeah. So, however, they were challenged. In 2014, there wasn't enough water for even some of the senior-most water rights. And so it got really tense and really shocking, and the attorneys, how many attorneys in the room before I make my remark? They were lining up to line their wallets representing, people over claims over who has rights and who should get water and all that. So if we can avoid those very, very, very dry years, I think that would be really awesome. Yes?
Why are those numbers out to 100%? I mean, if you have all of that, you got somebody getting 100% extra.
It's a little bit of round off.
Well, round off. Round should be rounded up, rounded down.
I should have had an engineer do this for me. That's the answer.
Or an elected
I was asked to come and be informative and insightful, not a comedian. So I don't know if I can. Director McKinney.
Just talk for just a second about the water rights system that we have in the state. It's true, it's arcane and it's been around and it's very confusing. The water rights system of the state, down at its foundation, is based on the idea that water has to be moved from where it is to where it's needed in an arid state. And to do that, it costs money to build infrastructure. So our water rights system was designed to allow people to spend the money to build the infrastructure and then reward them with a priority to use that water. So, a place like Sacramento that lives right on the river has water rights because they use that water, and our system gives them those rights. Where we've kind of lost touch sometimes with that idea today in California is this idea that somehow Southern California is taking Northern California's water, when in fact the water belongs to the state. We have rights to that water because the Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation for the Central Valley Project applied for water rights permits in the middle of the 20th century and got them from the State Water Resources Control Board on behalf of the contractors for those systems. So we have water rights, and they're approved by the state board for us to use that water, and that's foundational to the way we allocate water in the state. So all this discussion about us taking their water, or we should be more self-reliant, and all that is, swell, I guess, from a 21st century ecological utopian perspective, but it's not the way our water rights system works. It's not what our investments have been based on.
And that's founded in the state constitution. So you can have a riparian right, which means if you're along the river or water body, you can use that water on your adjacent property, or you can make the investment, construct, and move the water to where the area of needs are, provided that it's used in a reasonable and beneficial way. So a lot of disputes also occur over reasonable and beneficial use of water. So when we're trying to advance our water efficiency initiatives, whether it's water recycling or conservation, it's to show the rest of the state that we're the leaders when it comes to using water reasonable and beneficial. We shouldn't be criticized for using water that we built a project for, perfected a water right, and are taking delivery of. There's probably nobody that does a better job than maybe Orange County in being reasonable and beneficial users of water. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, so talked a little bit about the contractors. Jumping into the costs, we've dabbled on this a little bit. It's a big issue for Metropolitan. It's the largest cost in our budget. So the roughly over $1 billion, we're paying about $500 million, give or take 50, every year to the state, whether or not we receive a drop of water. So managing costs on the state water project is a big deal. I'll give a little bit of background, nuts and bolts on the water system costs. Contractors are obligated to repay the cost. There's no commodity charge. It's not like you're going and buying a carton of milk for $3 or something like that. We're paying for the facilities. We're paying for the reservoirs, the aqueducts, and we're paying for the energy to move it. And when we do that, DWR collects those costs and they charge to the contractors, and there's two ways. There's a conservation charge, and that's Oroville and San Luis Reservoir and a little bit of the pumping plants to generate the water to be allocated in a year. We call that the conservation charge. And then there's the transportation system, the California aqueduct, the pumping plants and the reservoirs that are needed to manage the water and deliver it on a timely basis to meet the needs of the contractors. Agricultural contractors, they take most of their water over an 8-month period spanning the summer, where the urban areas are more steady. They take water over the full 12 months with a little bit of an increase in the summer. So all the facilities were designed to meet those needs and to take into consideration that on-peak, off-peak power differential and try to move water with the cheapest amount of energy you could as possible. So when we get our bill comes to us in three sort of ways. We get the conservation charge. That's the Oroville facilities, San Luis. And we pay for that based on our Table A, our 1.9 million, 1,150,000 acre feet of Table A. That's the numerator. That's the basis for our charge on the conservation system. Roughly 46% of all the conservation charges. The transportation system's a little bit trickier because I mentioned agricultural contractors, they use the water in 8 months, so you have to design the facilities bigger to move a larger amount through a shorter period of time. So there's a complicated formula. We call it proportional use of facilities factor, PUF. Could spend a couple of hours with anybody afterwards explaining that. But it's a way to equitably take into consideration how water's moved differently for agricultural contractors and urban contractors. And then the power is paid for based on actual energy needed to move the water. So that's kilowatt hours per acre foot. The question was how much energy we use, and I said if you average the two sides, it's 3,200 kilowatt hours per acre foot, and that's what we would pay. Each year, the state will go through their process of, well, we've got generation from the Hyatt plant and the Gianelli plant, that's at San Luis Reservoir. We have recovery power plants along the aqueduct. I pointed out Castaic and Devil Canyon. That's not enough, so they buy from the external parties, and they will meld up all those costs and charges and credits from generation, and they'll come up with a billing rate, and that billing rate is what gets applied to the energy cost. Wetter years, the billing rate's lower. Drier years, the billing rate's higher, and but it's still a pretty reasonable cost to move. To give some perspective on the charges, this shows our fixed charges. So we're building up to the roughly $500 million that I mentioned that we would pay. So the fixed charges are the cost of the facilities, and we pay for those whether we get a drop of water or not. And in recent years, they've started to have to rebuild and rehab facilities that were built back in the 60s. So they've kind of reached their useful life, and they're starting to build up. So that's part of the explanation for those increases. But there's also studies and facilities that are dollars being spent on studies and facilities to deal with fisheries and environmental issues in the Delta. And that's another fixed cost that's adding to our costs. And the last few years have become very concerned about that and are really starting to drill in and make sure that the environmental scientists aren't just going crazy spending costs. So it's an effort that we've undertaken. So this shows the water supplies that we received, and you can see it fluctuates, but those fixed charges don't. We continue to pay. When you take those fluctuating charges and you add the energy on top, you can see what our total bill would be. And now you can see where we're at about the $500 million that I was referring to. Here's that number that I said that when I was cheerleading for the State Water Project, over the last 10 years, about $455 per acre foot, and recognize that there were 2 drought periods in there. So if we get wetter years, wetter periods, that average cost per acre foot is going to get down closer to $300. And I would argue that that's a pretty reasonably priced project. So I mentioned some of the things we're doing to try and control costs through various committees with the state water contractors. We've been drilling in and really partnering with managers at the Department of Water Resources to have them change their mindsets, the way they do business, and have them focus on being really an operating entity and managing their cost to budgets. And we've seen improvements, and hopefully that'll result in us reducing the cost increases moving forward. And each and every year, we perform an audit on the bills. And we find mistakes, and we submit those to the department. They correct them. Millions of dollars each year. I think we're up around, over the life of the project, we've found and corrected mistakes on the order of $200 million. So it's an important activity that we're engaged in, and we'll continue to do that because it's a really complicated project. There's a lot of engineers there, probably not enough accountants, and sorry to say. So I mentioned the environmental science spending a lot of money. Recently, there's been a focus in the last couple of years, and some committees set up to review all the budgets of their activities and make sure that they're only working on issues that are required by the regulations. So there were studies being done that are nice studies but aren't needed. So we've cut that out. Okay. So now I'll move on to how the water is allocated. So each and every year, DWR is going to allocate water. I've been talking about allotments, entitlements, Table A amounts. That's the contractual amount of water that you get from the State Water Project. Early on, contractors wouldn't need the full amount and facilities weren't constructed. So there was a schedule for how the Table A amounts or allotments would build up. And that's shown in this curve. By about 1990, the full Table A amount was dedicated to all of the contractors. However, not all the contractors had demands for that full amount. And so this orange line shows what contractors were requesting in that particular year. And even for Metropolitan, we didn't have the ability to take our full Table A amount until the late 80s, early 90s. So contractors were requesting less. So the project didn't need to deliver the full amount, and was doing a pretty good job till about the 1980s. Except for the drought in 1977, they were able to deliver and meet contractors' demands and needs. Oh, thank you. So it was in the late 80s and the early 90s when Metropolitan realized, oh, these facilities haven't been completed. We're not going to be able to get our 2 million acre feet from the State Water Project, and Metropolitan embarked on the IRP and is looking at managing the resources quite differently with large investments in local resources rather than relying on imported water supply sources. And that's positioned us well. And in this last drought, despite the governor's mandate that everybody conserve 25%, if he didn't do that, we still would have been able to manage with the water supplies that we had. Not true in many other parts of the state. They hadn't done the planning and they weren't prepared for big deficits, not only in the State Water Project, but their own local supplies as well. So the State Water Project has continued to operate, but it's highly variable because of the lack of facilities and particularly the inability to reliably move water through the Delta. So the mention of the passing of support for participation in Cal Water Fix is really a pretty important big deal. If we can get that project completed, that will firm up a significant amount of water supply that we can count on from the State Water Project. And hopefully there'll still be variations, and they won't be able to deliver 4 million acre feet, but we'll be able to count on the amount of supplies that they can deliver. So every year, the contractors are required to submit their order for how much water they want. That's done on October 1st. So we've already submitted our order, and we've taken into consideration what our member agencies' demands are and constraints and operational limits. And they take our numbers, run it through some models, and they'll come out with a number. That number is going to be very low because on December 1, most of the water year hasn't occurred yet. So they're going to be allocating very conservatively based on what can be exported in a very dry year and what little bit of water they have in a reservoir. So if they come out with an initial allocation of, say, 15% or 20%, that's no cause of alarm for me yet, because I anticipate we're going to have storms, there's going to be snowpack and runoff, and water supply will continue to develop. The hydrology historically in the state has been skewed more in Northern California, 2/3 on the wetter side than the drier side. So when they come out with that initial allocation in December 1, and it's a low number, I guarantee it will be, don't be alarmed. And as storms come through and run through Northern California, that number will rise and increase. This last year, we saw it get up to an 85% allocation. So when we're submitting our order, we take a lot of things into consideration. Where the reservoirs are, where we're going to place water to put into storage, or if it's going to be a drier scenario, where can we pull water out, how much water can we get out and meet the needs in different parts of our service area. It's a continual process. Every week we're meeting within Metropolitan, figuring out how to use the water and distribute it, and every month but actually even more frequent than that, we're communicating with the Department of Water Resources, because we're the biggest contractor. Changes in our operations and our demands and our orders significantly have changed how the State Water Project operates. So now I'll try to address some of the terms that Jose was referring to and that I continue to use as we go through the presentation. So first, Table A, water. That's really our entitlement that was provided to us in the State Water Project contract. The table represented the buildup of our supply over time, and when there was a lawsuit and there was disputes over what's called paper water, because you had this table and this buildup over time, part of the settlement was we would not, in an official setting, use the word State Water Project entitlement, because that seems like you're entitled to water that doesn't exist. I'm not quite sure I really understood all that. So to be correct, what we do is we just refer to the amount that's in the table, Table A amount. And again, our number presently is the 1.9,150,000 acre feet. Transfers. So in many years, we get transfer supplies. And on the State Water Project, those supplies are generally developed in the Feather River system. So primarily they're rice farmers that will fallow or not irrigate their crops, and the water that they would have used, which is a high priority, one of the highest priority rights in the state of California, can then be transferred to export agencies in Southern California. The reason why we don't do it further up on the Sacramento River system is because some of the constraints in the Delta, much of that water is made available in the March, April, May timeframe when they'd be flooding up their rice farms. So if they're not flooding it, that water would be flowing into the river. In those periods, the March, April, May, is when this Delta smelt, this tiny little fish, is impacting the operations of the State Water Project. So we likely wouldn't be able to capture that water. So it would just, if we paid those Sacramento River farmers to not grow, that water would just flow out. But when it's on the Feather River system, when we pay them not to grow, that water can stay in Oroville Reservoir until there is an opportunity for us to export it. And so that's why the geographic scope is limited. There would be a lot more opportunities, and potentially we'll be able to entertain those with the tunnels, because we won't have to move the water through the Delta and be impacting the fish species. So something to look forward to in the future. Exchanges. There's a number of agencies that we've done exchanges with. When we've had water in wet years, we'll provide it to them. They'll give it back to us in dry years. There's different ways and different reasons we've done exchanges, and it's with various different contractors throughout the state. And then wait a second. Probably one of the most significant exchange we do is with Desert Water Agency, DWA, and Coachella Valley Water District, CVWD. And they're located in the Palm Springs, Palm Desert area. They never hooked up to the State Water Project. But they wanted to, they have a contract to get supplies. So we worked out an arrangement with them where we would take their State Water Project supplies and leave water off the Colorado River aqueduct for them to use. They take it and they recharge it into their groundwater basin. That's been pretty successful. And in fact, in the 60s, we negotiated an agreement with them that allowed us to pre-deliver water to them. So when we had low demands and we had extra water on the Colorado River aqueduct, we kept it flowing at 1 million, and then we dumped water off to Desert and Coachella, and that water moved into their groundwater basin. That's been an important exchange that has helped us get through a number of issues, whether it be water quality issues, salinity issues, or drought, where we've been able to just take Desert and Coachella State Water Project water and not leave water off because we had a banking account developed. Now, this is a picture of that's the Whitewater River, which is only a river when it's like a monsoon or when Metropolitan's releasing water from the Colorado River Aqueduct. And then it goes down to spreading basins. If you're heading out on I-10 out to the desert area, you see those off to the right. If you drove through there right now, there would be water going through the Whitewater River. Okay, now, so Article 21 supplies. We used to call this surplus, but for political and contract reasons, we now call it Article 21 because Article 21 is the provision in the contract that allows DWR to allocate water when there's extra water in a way that's not consistent with your Table A amount. So think of it as surplus. And it becomes surplus when San Luis Reservoir is full. So DWR, if they were to export water, they wouldn't have any place to put it unless there was a demand. So San Luis Reservoir is full and excess capacity. So Banks Pumping Plant could have pumped water had there been a demand. So if you're a state water project contractor, your demand's met, but you have a reservoir or groundwater basin or somewhere that you can take delivery of that water and put it, you can order it as Article 21 water. The building of Diamond Valley Reservoir and the inland feeder has positioned Metropolitan very favorably in many years to capture Article 21. It's usually only available in December, January, February, those very early months in the water year. And of course, the reservoir's got to be full. We have to be meeting all of our other demands. Then we can take delivery. Some of the agricultural contractors that have groundwater banking programs, they're well suited to also take delivery and capture Article 21. But there's only a few contractors that do, and Metropolitan's one. And we like to capture and soak up as much water as we can. So we're always trying to create a water schedule that will allow us to capture and take a benefit of this surplus water supply. So carryover is a contract provision that allows us to take our water this year, 2017, and keep it in the system until next year, 2018. The contract provides that contractors can store or carry over half of their supply or 200,000 acre feet, whichever is less. So in Metropolitan's case, 200,000 acre feet is clearly less than half of our supply, so that's the limit, the amount that we can take. In drier years, that number gets a little bit smaller, so it's somewhere between 100 and 200,000 acre feet. But as San Luis Reservoir fills up, that's an indicator for whether there's system capacity for state water project water to be held. So they look at San Luis Reservoir, and as it fills, the risk of you losing your surplus your carryover supplies increases. So we manage it by watching where the reservoir is, knowing what our demands are, and trying to take delivery of the water. Last year, there were a number of contractors that were surprised. We were in the middle of the drought, and some people figured, well, we're in a drought, we're always going to be in a drought. But if you remember, I said, historically, in the state, 2/3 of the years are wetter than drier. We were still betting or banking or planning for a wet situation to come up. So we were positioned to be able to take all of our carryover supplies. Other contractors weren't. And so we helped out. We did an exchange. They delivered the water to us. We held it in our share. took delivery of it. We actually weren't entirely successful. There was about 700,000 or so that reverted to project water, and that was water we didn't have to return to those partners as an exchange. So we were held whole. They lost some of theirs, but a significant amount less than they would have if they didn't do the program with us. So we were able to use our resources. We captured a little bit more water, and we're trying to be helpful. Probably wouldn't be able to do that this year because San Luis Reservoir is already full today, and we haven't even got into the real wet period. Groundwater storage. So as a part of our water order, we include deliveries to water storage programs or withdrawals from water storage programs. So after developing the IRP, we look to increase our storage amount more than 10 times the storage volume that we had prior to, thank you, Jose, prior to the 90s, with the addition of our groundwater storage programs, Diamond Valley Lake, Lake Mead storage. So what we do with these storage programs is in wetter years, we deliver water. They're primarily agricultural agencies. They put it on their crops. They don't pump water out of the ground. In years where we need water, we make a call. They turn on groundwater pumps, and they pump water out when they're not irrigating their crops and allow that water to be delivered to us. And they've been very successful. In the drought that lasted from 2007 to 2009, we pulled out over 300,000 acre feet of water, which really helped us not get into a deeper drought situation. I see a question in the back.
How does this affect the aquifers in the central?
Well, they are stressed. They are somewhat stressed aquifers. However, we're putting water in, and then they all assess a loss. Some of them are up to about a 10% loss rate. It's far less than the evaporative amount is far less than 10%. So there's more water going into that basin because of banking than being pulled out. And in between, while we have water stored in there, it's actually bringing groundwater levels up. So it's lowering their pumping costs. So they like that because it affects their pocketbook. Not only are we paying them to store, but their energy costs are then less because the groundwater levels have come up. And then lastly, flexible storage. Now this isn't storage in the sense that it's a bucket that we put water in and take out. These are State Water Project reservoirs. Castaic is the upper one. Lake Paris is the lower one. And we have rights to pull water out of those reservoirs. So we can pull out 65,000 acre feet out of Lake Paris. It's roughly half the volume of water in Lake Paris when the dam's fixed and it's restored. And in Castaic, we pull out 154,600. The reason why that's a weird number is because with Lake Paris, we're the only participant that draws water out of Lake Paris. In Castaic, the amount of flexible storage that's provided in the contract is 160, but we share that with Castaic Lake Water Agency and Ventura County Flood Control Water Conservation District. So they're roughly getting about 6,000 acre feet. We're getting the 154. So in 2014, deep into the drought, we pulled all the water out of our flex storage accounts. So 154,000 out of Castaic, 65 out of Lake Paris. In later years, when the water was available, 2016 and 2017, we've returned the water to those reservoirs. So it's like a little bit reversed from a reservoir where you start with an empty reservoir and you're putting water in. We're pulling water out. We have a 5-year requirement to pay water back that we've pulled water out. So this shows water deliveries into our service area. Actually, it doesn't. it shows the total amount of water that we managed on the state water project, and then the white bars, I think those are white, show the water that we managed, storage, exchanged, transferred. So the blue would represent the water that we actually took into our service area, Table A amounts from the state water project, and the white is either we banked water or we took delivery of it. But you can see we're on average, we're utilizing 1 million acre feet, the state water project, and that included 2 drought periods, 2008, 2009, and 2013 through 2016. So while we're not getting everything that we originally wanted from the state water project, it's still a pretty good water producer. So some more cheerleading for the state water project. Many benefits we receive. Groundwater recharge, I think that's an important piece for large portions of our service area, including Orange County. It's important for recycled water. Being able to keep salinity levels down in our delivered supplies enable us to support the use of recycled water so that water can be used repetitively as salt builds up in it. If we're only delivering Colorado River water and it was 600 milligrams TDS, it wouldn't get used as much as you would if you had State Water Project blended with it and keeping down. Diamond Valley Lake more than doubled the amount of storage in all of Southern California when we constructed it. We fill it up with State Water Project water, and we use it during the drought. And in system reliability, we're able to move water because of the multiple entry points on the State Water Project to various different parts. Actually, the entire part of our service area can be delivered to State Water Project supplies. This shows the difference between salinity on the State Water Project and the Colorado, and significantly lower on the State Water Project. In very wet years like this, the salinity plummets. So we're bringing in very low TDS water. How am I doing in time? Do I need to wrap up? Or 2 minutes? Okay, 3 minutes. Challenges. I mentioned a number of these. Subsidence. We've seen 2 different types of subsidence along the State Water Project. The one here on the right side with the man standing by the pole, that picture was taken back in the 70s. It showed what happened when agriculture overdrafted the groundwater basins in the San Joaquin Valley. There's been a resurgence of that. With the drought and some of the fishery restrictions, there's been a lot more pumping. So we're seeing sections of the aqueduct actually lower. What that means in the near term, reduced capacity, we have to pump more on peak, it costs us. But in the future, we're going to have to spend a lot of money to repair. It's about, I forget what they were saying, $1 million a mile or something like that. And this is over 100 miles portion of the aqueduct. In the Kern County portion, they call it subsidence. Really, it's an issue where the water gets behind the panels and underneath the aqueduct, and minerals are leached out of the soil, creating voids. And over time, you'll have some compaction or consolidation. They call it subsidence. You have panels crack, and you can see where sections of the embankment, the panels, get washed away. We had a 2-month outage a year ago where they had to go in and replace and repair panels, and that's what you see in the upper right portion. Aging infrastructure, the Clifton Court gates, they look really good there, but if you look underneath, there's an apron where the water comes in, and material had eroded underneath it, so it had cracked and it was significantly damaged. Department did a great job of repairing that in the wet and getting everything back on back at speed. The lower right one, that's Oroville at the height of the failure of the spillway, right before they had problems with the emergency spillway. I was actually up there yesterday. They are on track to have that operable by November 1st. And it's a massive undertaking, and they've really done a good job getting that on this up to speed. Dam remediation, I talked about Lake Paris, fixing the dam there. There's some similar work that will need to be done at San Luis Reservoir. That's the facility shown in the upper left. For quite a while, I've heard about the fishery declines in the Delta, and that's a Delta smelt, and hopefully, with the support for Cal Water Fix, we'll be able to build a project that will help reverse some of the impacts that are caused by the project operations on fisheries, and we'll be able to operate and manage more productively in the future. Shows the blue lines show the emergency pathways. If there was a failure, agencies would work to rebuild levees and be able to move water. The green lines show the tunnels and how they'll avoid the delta channels to move water. So there's a number of ways that we influence the State Water Project and actions. One, we're trying to extend the contract. So we know that if we're going to be on the hook to pay for a Cal Water Fix, that we can enjoy the State Water Project and reliable deliveries. So we've negotiated an extension that will take it out through 2035. It also relieves some financial challenges on the State Water Project, and we'll be able to spread out its cost. We participate in value engineering. When I say we, Metropolitan engineers participate in value engineering projects. So when they're going to do a program or a project like repairing a spillway or rehabbing a pump, they'll do a value engineering process. Metropolitan's engineering workforce will participate in that, make sure that reliable facilities are constructed and that we manage the cost. We actually have a reimbursable agreement. Our shops at Metropolitan can do up to $5 million of work. So they repair gates, work on equipment because of the massive tools that are needed. DWR doesn't have it. They'd have to get contracts and farm it out. Sometimes it's easier for them just to come to us and have us do it, so we have an agreement where we help them out. Paris recovery wells. Strangely, the groundwater basin just upstream of Lake Paris was the only one that was rising during the drought. And some people allege that that's due to the seepage from Lake Paris, and partly it may be. But there's other factors that are contributors as well. So the Department of Water Resources has a project to build wells to collect the water that would be seeping out of the dam. They've asked Metropolitan to take delivery of that, so we've agreed to do that. More recently, because of things that are going on with rehabbing the Oroville spillway and the Delta fix, they've actually asked us if we could help out with the engineering components and aspects to that too. And so we've agreed to do that so they can move forward with that project and still worry about the safety issues at Oroville Dam. Design and construction enterprise, that's the Cal Water Fix. The program to design and construct it is going to be done through a JPA. Metropolitan will be participating in that. We have experience with tunneling and massive, large projects. I think we bring value and benefit, and we'll help that project along. And then finally, the Joint Powers Authority. There was a JPA of state water contractors that was set up roughly about 15 years ago, and its aim was to help the department operate and do maintenance on the state water project where it's needed. The problem is they never ask for our help, and when we offer it, they find reasons to refuse it. So we're prepared, we stand ready, and when there are needs, we're ready to jump in and help out. So I think I'm a few minutes over. In summary, the State Water Project's not perfect, but it delivers in the order of 1 million acre feet a year. We're ready to help. It's really important to us that we're able to manage the costs on the State Water Project. We spend a lot of time drilling into their projects, their designs, but also their billing system to make sure that what we pay is reasonable, appropriate, and consistent with the contract. And when we're dealing with the State Water Project, we're focusing on water reliability and smart water management. So I will stay for a little bit, happy to answer any questions, but I'll turn it back over to
help me. Before Willie, let me just mention, about 26 years ago, I was the president of the Society of Professional Engineers in California, and I got an invitation from the Metropolitan Water District to go on a tour to meet the facilities. I went there, and I was impressed with the magnitude, the quality of the work that Metropolitan Water does. My specialty was groundwater. However, I was building houses in Inland Empire and Orange County doing land development. After this tour, I decided I was going to work for Metropolitan. And Kevin was already working at Metropolitan, and I was lucky enough to have him in the panel who interviewed me. So that was 26 years ago. I spent 25 years at Met. I retired last year, and I'm glad we have people. It was a pleasure working with Kevin in every aspect of this project and also the groundwater and local projects. But what I want to reinforce is the power of Metropolitan, the quality. They only hire the best people, and I don't know why they hire me. But that is to show you that the money that you pay in your water bill is well taken care of by people at Metropolitan, and therefore at the member agencies too. So let me help again welcome and say thank you to Kevin. And the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.